now to California. California is the place where COVID-19 is rapidly spreading through the state's overcrowded prisons. More than 400 people have tested positive at San Quentin State Prison, where the virus has reportedly spread to a number of cell blocks and even death row. The spread began when the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation transferred nearly 200 incarcerated people from a prison in Chino with a massive COVID outbreak to San Quentin and another prison. Outbreaks soon began at each prison where people had been transferred. At least 19 incarcerated people in California have now died from COVID-19. This follows months of calls for mass release. As advocates and incarcerated people warn, conditions make it nearly impossible to stop the virus once it enters a prison. On Friday, a U.S. district judge in Oakland wiped tears from his face, calling the San Quentin outbreak a significant failure of policy and planning. For more, we go to Los Angeles to speak with Adnan Khan, Executive Director of Restore Justice, which advocates for policy and alternative responses to violence and life sentences. Adnan Khan, formerly incarcerated, served 16 years and spent 4 years at San Quentin State Prison. We welcome you to Democracy Now! Adnan, I got to see you at San Quentin a few years ago when the Democracy Now! Team went there. If you can talk about what's happened. We had a show just a few months ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, where this was predicted, an outbreak at San Quentin. Explain how this happened.
It's very simple. They moved, the correction staff moved a bunch of people from one of the deadliest outbreaks. 16 of the 19 deaths in California prisons are recorded in the Chino prison. And 120 people were transferred from that prison into San Quentin, which 2 weeks ago had 0 cases. And that today, in about a week and a half later, we are over 400 cases. So when we say about preventable, I cannot say that COVID-19 could not have been prevented in San Quentin, but I do want to say that immediately after that transfer from the most deadliest prison outbreak that we've had in California, a huge outbreak occurred in our prison system here in, specifically in San Quentin.
And Adnan, many of the prisoners in San Quentin are elders. They're lifers with life sentences there, and they're particularly at risk. Could you talk about the San Quentin population compared to other prisons in the California system, and what Governor Newsom, who's in the news a lot about what he's doing for the rest of California, doing about the prison situation?
So first of all, Governor Newsom has been radio silent. He comes on and talks a lot about the COVID in California, and everyone in California will be tested. And he talks a lot about California, but refuses to talk about the prison system as if there aren't Californians, 120, actually 200,000 plus Californians incarcerating here in this state. So it seems like Governor Newsom has been radio silent on this particular issue. When it comes to the population, the demographic in San Quentin, yes, there are a lot of people who are considered lifers, people who are sentenced to life in prison, and people who have been there for a very, very long time or been in prison for a very, very long time. So we get this dichotomy a lot, and a lot of this deserving versus non-deserving conversation that we should only release nonviolent, low-level or drug offenders. I don't like using that term, but for context here. And I think that we continue to push away people who actually and factually are the safest population to release. People who've been deemed, quote unquote, violent for the rest of their life, and people who've been in prison since they were teenagers. I was sentenced to 25 years to life as an 18-year-old, and I was considered by law a violent person, but my actions proved otherwise. So there's many people in our prison system, particularly San Quentin, that have an elderly population who have been in prison for decades. And as we keep talking about, when we do talk about reducing the prison population, we only focus on the front door of prison, but we never focus on the back door of prisons where there are people who are just jam-packed. And as we talk about mass incarceration, I think it's a very important topic to discuss static incarceration, where people are stuck in prison, not just the volume of people with mass, but when there's people stuck in prison who don't have a release valve, don't have a release date. We need to reorganize that and look at that again in our system.
And I wanted to ask you also about those people who do test positive in San Quentin. As I understand it, they're moved to a place called the Adjustment Center, where typically that was used for solitary confinement. Explain to us more about this adjustment center.
So the adjustment center has always been a place where it is solitary for those in solitary. So, for example, if someone on condemned row in San Quentin, out of the 34, 35 prisons in California, is the only place that houses people that are sentenced to lethal injection. So if somebody has a disciplinary infraction on condemned row, the adjustment center is the solitary confinement for them. And so what has happened is as COVID had this flare up in San Quentin over the past 2 weeks, they have filled the adjustment center with COVID patients. However, they only have about 100 bed spaces there, and they're already 300 bodies over, or 300 people over the amount that they can hold in that adjustment center. So now I'm being told that chapel spaces, gyms, and other locations are being used as COVID patient wards as overflow. But as we've seen, within a matter of a week and a half in San Quentin, that lies in the middle of the Bay Area in Marin, the flare-up is at 400, which within a week. And we can expect a flare-up to be even higher, coming days. One thing I want to share is a lot of people in society feel like that what happens inside our prison system will not affect them out here in the real world. And I think that is the biggest mistake that we continue to make. So if we have in California close to 200,000+ people that are incarcerated in California and over 67,000 staff that come in and out of these facilities, essentially every 8 hours, it is very difficult for us to believe that COVID-19 and coronavirus will safely contain itself within prison walls. And that's not the case.
You tweeted earlier this week, Adjustment Center, AC, in San Quentin, is where revolutionary George Jackson's historic incident took place. He was murdered by Corps off outside of the AC. Now that's where 200+ COVID-19 outbreak cases are being sent. The AC, of course, within solitary confinement. Can you comment on this, the significance of this?
You know, the Adjustment Center has always been, prisons in general have always been seen as a punishment on society, on Black and brown people, on people who have already been criminalized just based on the color of their skin. When you bring that into prison, which we're talking about systemic oppression, I want to make sure that everyone knows that there's a tie to what's happening out here in the world with the uprising and the connection to the prison system. Really quickly, I want to say that there are literally millions of people in prison based on the quote unquote, credible testimony and written reports of the very police that we're seeing brutalize protesters, brutalize and shoot at media and nurses during these peaceful protests. And worse, the same officers who are responsible for murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and many, many more. And so there are lots of people in prison based on that. So as we're having these uprisings out here and we follow what happened in history with the uprising in the 60s civil rights movement, George Jackson was a revolutionary that we can, it's hard to describe in a few seconds, but the incident took place in the very adjustment center now we're using to house people. I'm sorry. Yes.
We're going to have to leave it there. Adnan Khan, I want to thank you for being with us, Executive Director of Restore Justice, recently released from San Quentin. And that does it for our broadcast.